Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail.
Yeah.
It's a powerful line, isn't it, from Lamentations?
Yeah.
And it really captures that feeling, I think, of clinging to hope when everything around you is falling apart.
Yeah.
And today on By the Pages, we're going deep into the Book of Lamentations.
Okay.
A collection of poems attributed to the prophet Jeremiah,
Right.
grappling with the aftermath of Jerusalem's destruction.
It's a raw, unfiltered look at loss.
Yeah.
On a national scale.
Yeah.
Imagine the year is 587 BC. The Babylonians have just razed Jerusalem.
Wow.
The temple, the heart of their faith, is in ruins.
Yeah.
People are scattered. Their world is shattered. That's the backdrop against which these laments were written.
Let's start with chapter 1.
Okay.
It opens with this powerful image of Jerusalem as a desolate widow,
Right.
abandoned by her allies and stripped of her former glory.
The language is just visceral. She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Lamentations 1 verse 2. Just a visceral, emotional response
Yeah.
to the utter devastation.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the physical destruction. It's
Yeah.
about the loss of identity, security, everything they held dear.
And it's interesting how the poem directly links their suffering to their actions.
Right.
It's not just bad luck.
Yeah.
It's a consequence of their turning away from God.
Exactly. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen, she findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. Lamentations 1, verse 3. This sets up a key theme that runs throughout the book.
Right.
The consequences of sin and the need for repentance.
And you see the weight of that in lines like, Jerusalem hath grievously sinned, therefore she is removed. Lamentations 1, verse 8.
Yeah.
And the Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Lamentations 1.19.
Right.
This is a stark acknowledgement of their responsibility.
For what has happened.
Yeah.
Imagine reading those words amidst the ruins of your city, your home, your life. Wow.
It's a confrontation with the consequences of their actions,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively. And yet, even in this bleakness, there's a recognition of God's justice.
Then in chapter 2, the focus shifts to the utter destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
We get these incredibly vivid descriptions of God's wrath.
Yeah.
He's depicted as a consuming fire, a hunter taking aim, a force of nature unleashed against his own people.
It's a powerful, even terrifying depiction of divine judgment. The Lord hath swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He hath brought them down to the ground. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. Lamentations 2, verse 2.
Wow.
It's not just a slap on the wrist.
Right.
This is the dismantling of their entire world.
It's almost hard to reconcile these images with the God of mercy and love
Right.
that we often hear about.
Yeah.
How do you think the original audience would have wrestled with that tension?
I think that's precisely the point.
Lamentations doesn't shy away from the difficult questions. It's wrestling with this seeming contradiction. A God who is both just and merciful, who loves his people, but also allows them to suffer.
And within that suffering, we see the very human cost of this destruction.
Right.
The poem doesn't just focus on buildings and walls.
Yeah.
It shows us the faces of the people who are bearing the brunt of this judgment.
Yes, there's that heart-wrenching image of starving children, their cries echoing through the deserted streets. They say to their mothers, "Where is corn and wine?" Lamentations 2, verse 12. This isn't some abstract theological concept. It's about mothers watching their children die of hunger, about families torn apart, about the fragility of human life in the face of overwhelming loss.
It's a reminder that even in ancient texts, we find echoes of the suffering we see in the world today.
Exactly.
Wars, famines, displacement. These are not just things of the past.
And that's what makes Lamentations so relevant.
Yeah.
Even thousands of years later. It speaks to the universal human experience of lost grief and the search for meaning in the face of unimaginable suffering.
Yeah.
It asks us to confront the reality of pain and to wrestle with those difficult questions that arise when we see such devastation,
Right.
whether in our own lives or on a global scale.
Now, in chapter 3, the tone shifts somewhat.
Okay.
We move from this communal lament
Right.
to a more personal, introspective voice,
Okay.
often interpreted as Jeremiah himself.
The chapter is structured as a triple acrostic, with each letter of the Hebrew alphabet appearing 3 times in succession.
Wow.
This intensifies the feeling of the speaker's anguish, the weight of this grief pressing down on them.
And we get lines that express both utter despair and a glimmer of hope.
Right.
He hath filled me with bitterness. He hath made me drunken with wormwood. He hath also broken my teeth with gravel stones. He hath covered me with ashes. Lamentations 3, verse 15 to 16. It's a visceral description of emotional and even physical suffering.
But then just a few verses later, we get those famous lines that embody the core message of Lamentations.
Yeah.
It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Lamentations 3, verse 22 to 23. Even in the depths of despair, even when questioning everything, there's this clinging to the belief in God's enduring mercy.
It's a powerful reminder that even when we feel abandoned, even when we can't understand why things are happening, God's compassion is still there. It's a constant, a source of hope in the midst of darkness.
And this flicker of hope leads to a call for introspection. Let us search and try our ways and turn again to the Lord. Lamentations 3, verse 40. It's a recognition that maybe, just maybe, there's a way back from this abyss.
Yeah.
It's not just about wallowing in despair. It's about taking responsibility, seeking forgiveness, and trying to find a path back to God.
So we've gone from the communal lament of a desolate city to the personal anguish of an individual wrestling with his faith.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Chapter 4 brings us back to the suffering of the people, but this time with an even more graphic, visceral intensity. It's a stark portrayal of the consequences of sin, the depths of their degradation.
And it's interesting how the chapter contrasts their former glory with their current state. It's like holding up a mirror to their fall from grace.
Yes, we see that contrast in lines like, "How has the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out on the top of every street. The precious sands of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter?" Lamentations 4, verse 1 to 2. They've gone from gold to clay, from precious sons to worthless vessels. It's a powerful image of how far they've fallen.
And then there's that chilling line, "The punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom." Lamentations 4, verse 6. Sodom, the city synonymous with wickedness and depravity, is somehow judged less harshly than Jerusalem.
That's a powerful statement. It suggests that perhaps their sin wasn't just about specific actions, but about a deeper betrayal. They were God's chosen people entrusted with his law and his covenant, and their failure to uphold that covenant carries a heavier weight.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It makes you think about what it means to be chosen to have a special relationship with God and the responsibility that comes with that. It also makes you question whether those who have been given more are held to a higher standard.
That's a question that resonates throughout history, even today. It challenges us to consider how our own actions and choices might be judged, especially if we claim to be followers of God.
So we've journeyed through the desolation of Jerusalem, the personal anguish of the prophet, the horrific consequences of their sin. What awaits us in the final chapter?
Chapter 5 brings us back to a communal voice, but this time it's less about raw grief and more about a desperate plea for God's mercy for restoration. It's like they've moved through the initial shock and anger and are now left with this profound sense of loss and a desperate hope for a future.
And there's a real sense of humility now, a recognition of their role in this tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. Our fathers have sinned and are not, and we have borne their iniquities. Lamentations 5, verse 7, they're acknowledging the weight of the past, the sins of their ancestors that they've inherited and perhaps even perpetuated.
It's like they're saying, we see now where our choices have led us, how our actions have broken this covenant. It's a confession, but also a plea for understanding.
And this plea culminates in that poignant final verse. "Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old." Lamentations 5, verse 21. They're laying bare their helplessness, their dependence on God's grace to make things right.
It's a powerful ending, but also ambiguous. We're left wondering, does God respond? Do they find restoration?
That's the beauty of Lamentations, and perhaps its most challenging aspect. It doesn't offer a neat resolution, a happily ever after. It leaves us wrestling with the uncertainty, the tension between despair and the persistent hope for redemption.
It mirrors the experience of grief and loss in real life, doesn't it? There's not always a clear answer, a sense of closure.
Exactly. And that's why it continues to resonate with readers centuries later. It reflects the complexities of faith, the rawness of human emotion, the struggle to reconcile suffering with the belief in a loving God.
Now, beyond the emotional and theological depth, we also see a remarkable literary artistry at work in Lamentations.
Absolutely. The use of acrostic structure, where each verse begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet in 4 out of the 5 chapters, is astonishing. Imagine the skill and intentionality required to weave such complex poetry while grappling with such profound grief.
It's like they're imposing order on chaos, finding beauty amidst the ruins.
Precisely. And this structure isn't just for show. It highlights the deliberateness of their lament, the way they're wrestling with these emotions, searching for meaning within the structure of their faith, even as their world crumbles around them.
And chapter 3, with its triple acrostic, emphasizes the cyclical nature of grief, the way it can feel all-consuming, like you're drowning in it.
Yet even within that darkness, we find those glimmers of hope, those expressions of God's faithfulness. The structure itself becomes a metaphor for the human experience of suffering and the enduring possibility of finding light within it.
It's interesting to consider the debate surrounding the book's authorship. While traditionally attributed to Jeremiah, some scholars suggest multiple authors, or a later compilation of laments. How does that impact our understanding of the text?
It adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? If it's a collection of voices, it speaks to a collective experience of grief and resilience, showcasing the power of lament as a communal act.
It reminds us that we don't grieve alone. Throughout history, people have faced similar struggles, asked similar questions, and found solace in expressing their pain and hope.
Exactly. And even if written by a single author, the different voices and perspectives woven throughout Lamentations create a sense of shared experience. It's a reminder that even within individual suffering, there are universal truths that connect us all.
Now, stepping back from the text itself, it's crucial to understand the historical context that gave rise to these laments. The destruction of Jerusalem wasn't just a random event. It was a culmination of political and religious turmoil.
Imagine the Babylonian Empire, a growing superpower encroaching on Judah's borders. They were caught in a power struggle between Egypt and Babylon, caught in the crosshairs of empires.
And internally, there was this struggle between those who advocated for compromise for political maneuvering and those who held fast to their faith, believing God would protect them.
This tension, this internal division, is reflected in the laments themselves. There's anger, confusion, and a questioning of why God didn't intervene, why their prayers weren't answered in the way they expected.
It speaks to the challenges of faith in the face of overwhelming circumstances of trying to reconcile belief with the reality of suffering and loss. And it also forces us to acknowledge that sometimes even our most fervent prayers aren't answered in the way we hope for.
But even within that struggle, within the wreckage of their world, we see the enduring power of faith. They don't abandon God. They cling to him, even in their anger and confusion.
It's a raw, honest portrayal of faith tested by fire. And it's within that fire that they find the strength to lament, to question, to hope, and ultimately to seek restoration.
It's a powerful reminder that even when everything seems lost, when our world is shattered, the act of lament itself, of crying out to God, can be a source of strength, a way to begin the process of healing and rebuilding.
So we've explored the historical context, the literary artistry, the theological depth. Now, what are some of the key themes that emerge from Lamentations? What can we take away from this ancient text and apply to our own lives even today?
I think one theme that jumps out at me is the rawness and honesty of lament itself.
Right.
Lamentations doesn't sugarcoat the pain or offer any easy answers.
Right.
It just gives us permission to grieve,
Yeah.
to question, to express our anger and despair to God.
It's a reminder that faith isn't about suppressing difficult emotions. It's about bringing them to God, wrestling with them honestly, and finding solace in the act of pouring our hearts out to him.
And within that lament, we see the theme of sin and its consequences play out on both a personal and national level.
Yes, the destruction of Jerusalem serves as a stark reminder that our choices have repercussions, that turning away from God has real-world consequences. But it also highlights the possibility of repentance, of acknowledging our mistakes and seeking forgiveness.
It's not about wallowing in guilt. It's about taking responsibility and working towards reconciliation.
Right.
Both with God and with each other.
Exactly.
And that leads us to the theme of hope,
Yeah.
which threads its way through even the darkest passages of Lamentations. It's a hope rooted in God's enduring love and faithfulness.
Right.
A belief that even when we mess up, his compassion never fails.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the midst of suffering, even when everything seems lost, there's always a possibility of redemption,
Right.
of a new beginning. Another takeaway is the universality of these themes. Even though Lamentations was written in a specific historical context, Its message resonates across cultures and centuries.
Whether we're facing personal loss or witnessing global tragedies,
Right.
the emotions expressed in these laments, grief, anger, confusion, hope,
Yeah.
these are deeply human experiences
Yeah.
that connect us all.
It's a reminder that we don't suffer alone.
Right.
That throughout history, people have grappled with similar challenges and found strength in their faith and in the shared experience of lament.
And that brings us to the literary artistry of the text itself. The use of acrostic structure, vivid imagery, and poignant metaphors elevates Lamentations beyond a simple expression of grief. It transforms it into a work of art, a testament to the power of language to capture the depths of human emotion and the complexity of faith.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty and meaning can emerge.
Right.
That even in the wreckage of our lives, we can find solace and inspiration in the power of words and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Lamentations, I would encourage our listeners to go back and read the text for themselves. Allow its words to wash over you, to challenge you, to comfort you.
Yeah, don't be afraid to sit with the discomfort, the rawness, the honesty of these laments.
Right.
Because within those emotions, within that struggle, you might find a deeper understanding of your own faith, your own experiences of loss and hope, and the enduring power of God's love, even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
And if this deep dive has resonated with you, we encourage you to like and subscribe to By the Pages so you don't miss our future explorations of Scripture.